Hello and welcome to Prince George Up Close. I'm your host, Grant Bachand, and today's episode we have Councillor Jillian Merrick. We're going to be sitting down for a one-on-one conversation with her. How are you doing today, Jillian?
I'm great, thank you.
So I want to talk to you. We've worked together, and we've worked together in the past. I'm on the Student Needs Committee with you, so I figure we'll just let everybody know about that. I have a couple questions about student needs and everything coming up, but I want to talk to you about your time. You've been on council for quite a while so far. This is your second year, I believe. So
yeah, we're sort of well into the second year, so about 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm. So in 2016, how did you find it? What was some of the biggest challenges or some of the biggest successes you had?
You know, I think if you're given a 4-year period to do anything, there's going to be a natural ebb and flow to it. So the first year is really exciting. You're just sort of getting your bearings, figuring out how things work. You're still really keen to make all these great projects happen. The second year is where you start to understand the processes, and some of your projects start to move forward, and you really get a sense of what you really can achieve in 4 years and what's going to be more difficult, what processes can work for you and what processes are working against you. So it's where you start to test your learning quite a bit, and sometimes that can be really rewarding, and sometimes it can be really heartbreaking to find out that, the sentiment or the process or the rules or the momentum for this project is just not good enough to make this project happen.
So looking back on 2016, you've put forward quite a few projects and put through some initiatives that I think the bike lanes was one of the biggest things.
It was a very busy year, and I would say overall it was really successful in terms of getting some of the projects I wanted to see done.
Yeah. Looking back, what was the biggest one that you were surprised the most when you were dealing with it?
Surprised,
Yeah.
I guess in a negative way, was the backyard chickens bylaw.
Yeah.
It wasn't me that brought it to the table. It was a community group that had brought it to the table. But in my campaign in the election, I had clearly stated that I would support that type of move. It was defeated right at the beginning stages. So no investigation, no referral to administration, just an outright no. So that was a surprise. I thought we would at least, punt it over to administration for them to do a bit of research and provide us some feedback before we made a final decision, but didn't even make it to that stage.
Yeah. So it's obviously, this being your first time in politics, you're learning from all these different experiences.
Oh, you're learning every day, yeah.
Yeah. Are you going to be taking this into 2017 with another initiatives that you're going to be bringing forward?
I think so. I mean, the reality is my campaign was really centered around active transportation, and that file has been very busy. So those 3 main components to active transportation: pedestrian networks, cycling networks, and transit networks. And all 3 have been moving forward quite swiftly and quite suddenly after a long period of not much development. So pedestrian networks, we were finally successful in getting some more funding in the capital budget for that. Not quite as much as I'd hoped, but I'm hoping by the end of my term we'll be up to the $1 million annually invested in sidewalks. The nice thing about sidewalks that I discovered is there's a huge appetite for it in the community. It's not just a fringe issue, it's not a boutique issue. Time and time again we go to community meetings, and so many concerns and complaints are based on the lack of adequate pedestrian infrastructure, sidewalks, crosswalks, street lighting. So there's a huge community push for that. The second part, bike lanes, yeah, that was a big jump in terms of making bike lanes actually bike lanes.
Not parking lots?
Not parking lots, yeah. So it's a bit of us moving us out of the dark ages when it comes to cycling infrastructure, but there's still lots more to do. The big part about the bike lanes issues, we have hundreds of kilometers of bike lanes in the city. The ones that we had removed parking from about 70 kilometers of them, but those are only the arterial roadways and only the ones sort of in the main bowl, so it doesn't include College Heights, and it doesn't include what we call collector roadways, which are ones like Kearney, Simon Fraser. The easiest way to tell whether a road is an arterial or a collector is whether it has driveways on it. If it's got driveways on it, it's not really an arterial roadway. So we didn't change the parking rules for the bike lanes on collectors, which means we're still having challenges there. I think there's some relatively simple solutions that'll please a lot of people, but we've got to get there. And then finally with transit, we saw the first major transit expansion in I think 5 years with the addition of statutory holiday service this year. And then we're going to be adding 2,500 hours to transit service in September of this year.
So, like, looking at those things one by one, like looking at sidewalks, there's a lot of areas in the community that doesn't have sidewalk. What's some of the holdups that really makes it difficult when it comes to putting in a sidewalk?
So putting in a sidewalk is the most difficult because, first of all, the city may not own any property, so we'd have to work with the residents and landholders to create a right-of-way. There may not be what we call curb and gutter systems. So if you build a concrete barrier along the side of the road, there's got to be a place for the water off the road to go. If there's no gutter system, then our stormwater is going to flood the road, basically. The other issue is just around cost. It's extremely expensive because you've got to create an engineered bed for the sidewalk, whereas replacing some of our really old and not safe sidewalks is much easier because at least that curb and gutter and that engineering already exists. But having said that, we've got about, I'm trying to remember what the value was. We got about $500,000. Half of our sidewalk budget is dedicated to upgrading our existing sidewalks, and half of it is dedicated to installing new sidewalks.
And one of the big areas where, like whenever I hear people talking about sidewalks, it's usually around parents and kids and walking to school.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Especially in areas, and I remember when I went to Kelly Road, there were certain parts of my walk to school where there was no sidewalks or everything like that. Are those like the first priority in certain
They
ways?
are the first priority, and one of the reasons why so many of our schools don't have sidewalks is because they were originally part of the regional district. So the city before the 70s was actually a very small area. This part of town wasn't even in the city. South Fort George was part of the regional district. And so in the 1970s, there was a large amalgamation of these smaller rural communities outside the city, but they'd of course been built based on rural standards, not on urban standards, which meant they had never been designed around sidewalks, curb and gutter. And so we've got all these elementary schools that were established prior to being a city, and now we're trying to retrofit city urban planning into what was previously a rural district.
And it's a massive cost that comes with that too, right?
It's a huge, although the reality is building a new sidewalk is a fraction of the cost of building a new road, but it's still it's pretty expensive to get it done.
So now if I'm starting a new subdivision here in the community, do sidewalks have to be mandatory?
Absolutely, yeah. Sidewalks are now mandatory for new subdivisions. The challenge, of course, we have too is that we may have a previous neighborhood that had no sidewalks. We'll get 1 or 2 new developments on that, but we're not going to force the developer to build 20 meters of sidewalk all by itself. So the challenge is that the city really does have to foot the bill to make long, continuous sidewalk projects happen in existing neighborhoods.
And I don't know if this is like a myth or something, but I've always heard this, is that from the road, a certain amount of meters into a person's property is actually city-owned, and that's for sidewalks.
It's considered a right-of-way, so I guess on title it would be owned by the property developer, but at any given time the city can come in and remove trees, add sewer lines, do things like that. So I'm not a legal expert when it comes to title, but there is a certain area of private property that the city may have some limitations or claim to.
Mm-hmm. And then I know one of my own personal passions is basically transit. The Student Needs Committee that has been very vocal about this sort of thing, looking at transit, but also other people in the community have been very vocal about transit. And we've seen a massive progression, especially with the statutory holidays, but also there's a bit of a horizon in the long term for other changes. What makes that horizon so long? Like what makes why isn't there more rapid transit buses and things like that going on?
Well, why is it taking so long? Money is the simple answer. But even then, transit schedules are really sensitive. So when it comes to making changes, it takes a long time to test that, to see how, because we have so many connections in transit, test how a route change might affect another route, and B, test how it'll affect the customers. And of course, it's a partnering agreement between the city and BC Transit, so the city can't just throw money at it and make it happen. It has to be agreed to with our partner BC Transit, and then it has to be delivered by a third-party service provider, which is Pacific Western Transportation here.
So it's a bit of a challenge.
There's lots of partners, there's lots of challenges to it, so it takes time to make major changes in the transit system. But what we have is committed the dollars, so that hurdle is done in terms of adding these new service hours this coming year.
So looking down the road, we can probably see increased transit coming up, probably in the next five or so years.
Well, that's my hope. We haven't committed anything beyond this initial increase, but I know that we do have what's called the Active Transportation Plan. It outlines some simple steps for improving the transit system over the short and long term. And a rapid transit network is a big part of that and an important part of that. But I think there's going to have a few more pieces that fall into place, namely increased residents in downtown, just increased demand of the transit system before we start seeing move forward with those rapid transit networks.
So then downtown is an area that I've always thought was kind of interesting. We've been seeing tons of development down there, like Batula Burning, Crossroads, all these various different restaurants are happening. And what do you think is the drive behind that new vigor to the downtown area?
Well, I think there's two reasons. There's a market force, and then there's a government-influenced force. The government one is that we have a very robust tax incentive program for the downtown. So new developments are incentivized. You can get up to 10 years of tax-free development. We have the building improvement, facade improvement program through NDIT, which helps match the cost for people wanting to improve the facade and look of their buildings. But we also just have a lot of activity happening in downtown. So there's a lot of demand for things like restaurants and services and retail. And so smart business owners are investing in that. Certainly, I mean, the hotel is a big one. That's another major hotel coming in downtown Prince George, more traffic. The Whittick building was a big part of that as well. We now have students in downtown. So all kinds of things are happening. And
do you think that hotel will lead more into residential and people living in the downtown?
Well, the hotel itself won't have any residential units in it. So, but I don't think the hotel is directly connected to whether people live in downtown or not. I think people want to live in downtown, but our challenge is that we've not yet had a development proposal reach the final stages. So I think the city is considered to continue to be very aggressive in terms of finding developers and helping them build a business case for residences downtown. But so it's just a matter of time at this point, I think.
Yeah, but we're seeing still a lot of development happening in College Heights and these various different areas, and it seems like there's still a lot of people who want to move to Prince George, but they're moving into these more suburban sort of areas and these sort of things. Do you think that Prince George is just innately a suburban sort of community, and they don't have that sort of downtown dynamic that goes on?
I think Prince George is no one thing. I think there's a lot of people have different visions for the community, and there's not one right one and wrong one. So one of the main sort of visions or ideals that people see in Prince George is a peaceful, sort of pastoral, small city, has all the amenities, but lots of nature, peace and quiet. A lot of people that come to Prince George for that reason want space. They want a more rural lifestyle, but with all of the amenities. And so they tend to live in subdivisions at the outer bounds of our city. But there's also a lot of people that see Prince George as a land of opportunity. There's a lot of jobs, there's a lot of industry, there's a lot of places you can invest your money. A lot of places to do new things and great new opportunities and exciting stuff happen all the time. So very much a little bit more of an urban city, a rough and tumble city. And I think a lot of those people are attracted more to the downtown because that's exciting and it fits with their vision of Prince George. So there's no one group of people that's right or wrong on what Prince George is. It offers both lifestyles, and I think both lifestyles will continue to see investment in that area.
Yeah, and the more focus, especially with all these different restaurants, the more focus that their downtown is getting, it seems like that it's creating more of a buzz for a residency or some condos being built. I remember I've read multiple news stories about possible residential buildings going into the downtown area. So he's just kind of getting that next step, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the one we can speak to, I guess, that's just on the outside of downtown was the Riverbend Seniors Project, and the developer there has been very impressed with the pre-sales. That's not finished construction yet. They've almost entirely sold that entire building.
Oh, wow.
So, it's not in the downtown boundaries, it's just on the edge of it, but I think it's a good indicator that even for something like seniors housing, which are typically folks that are looking for a more relaxed lifestyle, there is a demand for something that's central and core and in close proximities to all the amenities that downtown provides, as well as just being seniors friendly. So there is definitely a shortage of housing in Prince George that it has low barrier for things like for people in wheelchairs, for people with mobility issues, and even just kids. Like getting your stroller in and out of the front door can be a real challenge if you've got 2 sets of stairs to go up. So,
as someone who moved into an apartment, I can fully vouch for that.
If you've ever had to move a fridge or a deep freeze into a split level, you'll agree that accessible housing benefits everybody.
So, thinking about where the future is going and where things are going, it's kind of interesting. Is the federal level, we've seen a lot of activity on an area that BC gets a lot of stereotypes around, which is marijuana. And one of my thoughts is, like, how does the municipal government deal with a federal push for legalization of marijuana when it comes to, or if it comes through, most likely it will. How does the city react to that sort of legislation coming through?
Yeah, so the city's responsibility is fundamentally about land use. What parts of our town are appropriate for what kinds of uses? So we also have a number of recreation facilities. And so fundamentally, when it comes to something like marijuana, our responsibility will be to include retail and production facilities in our zoning bylaw. So to designate, okay, where do we allow these types of sales and production facilities in our town? The second part is just around smoking and making sure that we include marijuana in our smoke and vape bylaw, which is actually brand new this year in terms of where we allow people to consume these products.
And then so the provincial government, they have some legislation on smoking and vaping, and then we have an added one onto that, right?
We do, yeah. So in many cases it matches, but for example, the provincial government doesn't prevent you from smoking or vaping in an outdoor area, but we don't want smoking and vaping in our parks. And so we've added an extra bylaw that says no smoking or vaping in our city's parks.
So that would then be extended then onto marijuana and the use of marijuana.
I would assume so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we look at that, though, this would be a pretty big thing to happen to Canada in like a social sort of way.
Yeah.
Is there, when the city comes and deals with marijuana, would it be something where are we looking at putting certain areas of being where there'd be dispensaries only and kind of keeping it in that, or would it be more open? What do you think would they
It's fundamentally a political question. So it really is about your views on narcotics consumption and what the best approach is to have the best benefit for society. I tend to be a bit of a libertarian in this front. I don't believe prohibition is effective in any way. And certainly when it comes to, for example, liquor, I've been supportive of moves that allow the more mainstream use of liquor. So, for example, the recent provincial changes that allow liquor consumption in movie theaters and barbershops and salons. For me, that's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. It allows us to include the consumption of liquor in places that are socially acceptable. And it's not just about going to have a drink. If you only have liquor service in bars and pubs, then you start to learn that the only reason to go have a drink is to go have many. Whereas if it's a more commonplace activity in restaurants, clothing stores, barbershops, you're primarily going for the activity you're going to, but you can also learn that, hey, I can have a drink and relax and be social, and it's not all about drinking. So it's the same thing with marijuana, only the difference is that there's fundamentally an issue with secondhand smoke, and so in that regard, there's going to be more restrictions on where it's consumed. But in terms of where it's sold, I'm fundamentally a proponent of fairness. So marijuana is a narcotic, and it's also a recreational drug. And so we shouldn't treat it any differently than we do for example, pharmacies. If we allow a pharmacy in certain zones, we should allow marijuana retail in certain zones. If we allow liquor stores in certain zones, we should allow, again, marijuana retail in certain zones. Fundamentally, that hasn't come forward yet, so there's still a lot of evidence to be presented and keeping an open mind to it, but that's generally where I sit on these things. Certainly other members of council would have very different views on that.
And then looking at this, is this maybe a situation where we need to start looking at more, we have the safe injection site downtown, or the forgetting the name of it right now, but there's a place where people can go downtown to receive clean needles and the needle exchange.
So that's a Northern Health facility. It's fundamentally a provincial facility. They do consult with us, but we have no legal jurisdiction over what they do. So it's fundamentally about the decision. I think the challenge we're having with that is the trade-off between keeping those sites accessible for people in need, but also preventing some of the side effects that they can have on the broader community. And we're seeing that I think that we're seeing that balance swing too far in one direction in 3rd and George right now, where both the clientele and the neighborhood is being taken advantage by some of the people who come to that site for looking for trouble. And they may not actually be clients of the site. They may be actually preying on some of the clients of the site, but we're having some challenges there. So Yeah, and it really is just a question of how we deliver medical services. I mean, housing and mental health training, though, is the preventative piece. We can tackle the harm reduction as much as we want, but it's always going to be a problem if there's not health services for people to help deal with addictions, deal with mental illness, deal with stress and family division and violence. So, and our court system is just backed up like crazy. So until those fundamental prevention and root cause address ways that we address the root causes are addressed, we're going to continue to have the same problem. So.
Yeah. So this needs to be something where we see leadership, probably from a provincial government sort of standpoint.
Provincial and federal. Prince George has done its best to advocate for things like a First Nations court, improved justice system, improved mental health investment, but we really have no jurisdiction over those issues. So we're just lending our voices to the voices that exist in the community to advocate for that.
Okay. And I guess one of the things that I've been finding, we were talking about housing. It's one of the things I find most interesting. There's been a lot of housing developments that have gone on. And when we look at social housing and everything like that. And I find it interesting is I recently heard a story about in Medicine Hat of the city going forward and building housing for homeless people and people who are at risk of becoming homeless. And it was something that the city done to kind of pretty much virtually eliminate homelessness in their community, at least living on the street sort of homelessness. Now, obviously, this is sort of a policy that's been done there. There's provincial leadership and all those sort of things. But would we ever see a Housing First initiative in Prince George?
Well, we do have a bit of a Housing First initiative in Prince George. It's been here for quite a while, but keeping in mind that each province runs its municipalities differently. So, for example, in Ontario, municipalities there are in charge of housing projects. In BC, they're not. That's still a provincial mandate. So, but what the city has done in terms of supporting housing development is we can contribute city land at no cost to not-for-profit housing projects. We have development subsidies for not-for-profit housing projects. We have great incentive packages for not-for-profit housing projects. So we do have a lot of skin in the game in some of these projects. But in terms of building them, managing them, that's not our bag, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it's not even really the provincial government's bag. BC Housing often contracts out the management of these facilities to nonprofits in the community, like Elizabeth Fry, that do a wonderful job. And so even then, it's not the provincial government running the housing project. They own it, but they do so on the behalf of, a contractor does so on their behalf.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess at the end of the day, it's sort of the role, I guess, of a municipality is advocating more than anything else. Is advocating on this mental health situation, advocating on opioids, advocating on housing. And that's how does the city actually advocate though? Like, how do they get their voice to a
There's
provincial
lots of
government?
different ways. So one of them is one-to-one meetings with ministers and local politicians. So we've tried to make that a regular practice. The other is making very public positions, open letters, statements in council. UBCM and FCM, so the Union of BC Municipalities and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, we have city councillors that sit on both boards, and those groups are primarily charged with advocating to different levels of government on behalf of municipalities. And then, of course, we attend the annual conventions of those groups each year and get a chance to lobby our politicians. So there's lots of different ways to do it, and I think Prince George is very active in that front.
Excellent. And I guess kind of like looking at wrapping this up here, talking about leadership is one of the things that I've kind of thought about a lot over this last little bit, especially student leadership and also women and girls in leadership positions as well. And there's a lot of young people who are really active. You're on the Student Needs Committee, so there's lots of youth leaders there. How do we encourage more youth, do you think? How do get them involved in those sort of things?
I think storytelling is a favorite one of mine, just because I think there's a lot of perceptions about what politics and leadership is that are very different from the reality, and we don't talk about it in an open way. And I think often when I share the stories of different things I do on a daily basis as a city councillor, people are surprised, and I think a lot more people would be open to the idea of running for that type of position if they knew it's not all about, cutthroat politics. It's actually just about going out, meeting people, building projects, doing research, and being out in the community. So one of the fundamental things I think is about an open and honest conversation about what those positions actually entail. We often complain about how busy we are, but the reality is that it's not overwhelming, and it's manageable, and it's something different every day, so it's very enjoyable. The other part is is creating space for those people. So it's one thing for someone to want to run for leadership, but I think it's another for those already in positions of leadership to create space. So we've done, for example, with the Student Needs Committee, created a group of mostly young people who represent student issues to advise the city in an official capacity. And so that's a great not only training ground for those members to learn about municipal government and make representations on behalf of their student bodies, but also just to meet other people in the city and develop their skills as leaders. So there's a couple other things that I've really been a really big champion of. One was the Miss Mayor event that we did last year. So we invited girls and women to come down and sit in the mayor's chair, get their picture taken, tell us what they'd do if they were mayor. And I'm hopeful that in the 2018 election, I'm not sure if I'll endeavor in a public fashion by putting an open call for people who want to learn what it might be like to run for council, or if I'll do more of a one-to-one mentoring, but I'm certainly committed to working with people who might have an inkling of an interest in community leadership and helping them foster and steward that. So,
is there a certain thing that you tell individuals when they say, listen, I'm really excited about this sort of idea, I kind of want to run for politics, but I'm nervous or scared, or I don't really know what it's going to be like? What do you say to the people when they're bringing those questions forward to you?
Well, fundamentally, anybody can be a politician. We get certain types of personalities that are in politics. They tend to be very extroverted, but introverts are fine in politics too. We need those critical thinkers. I mean, Angela Merkel's a biochemist? She's the president of Germany, or chancellor of Germany, whatever the position
Chancellor,
is.
Yeah.
So politics can be for everyone, and it is what you make it. I mean, there's.
He was hiding so well for so long.
My dog has been sitting under the table for this whole interview, and I think she's finally fed up. But yeah, it is what you make it, and you can make it your own. One of the best decisions I ever made, a lot of people talk about local government and how it just doesn't pay enough and you have to balance it with your full-time job. But one of the best decisions I ever made was actually to leave paid employment and commit a year to being a full-time counselor, and it was the most enjoyable thing. I mean, I was shopping with coupons, but I was still making it. It's councils, and it's a public wage, so I'll talk about it. I think council remuneration is $31,000 a year, which is about the living wage. So
as a student's earning
and coming from a student's background, you're like, hey, that'd be great.
That's an increase, you know.
Yeah, because fundamentally the only thing that's mandated in your schedule is your bi-weekly council meeting, and the rest of your 2 weeks is up to you to schedule, and so you can pursue all kinds of things that are to the benefit of your community in that time. And I think and it's very, very different from federal and provincial politics. I have a real distaste for parties and partisan campaigning, and I think municipal government is a great place to avoid that, quite frankly. You can be independent, speak your own mind, you're not tied to a party, and you can really just advocate for the issues that you feel are really important to community, and less focus on parties and taking sides.
Yeah, there's no political parties in cities. Is there? Like, I don't know.
Vancouver does, yeah, and that's fundamentally because I think there's 140 candidates on their ballot, and so they use party politics as a measure of
to filter, basically,
to try and communicate the values of all the huge ballot. But in Prince George, I mean, for example, we had 30 council candidates last year, which was pretty big, but we still do it without it. Yeah, so I really enjoy local government for that.
Mm-hmm. And so it's something that people can do. It's not you did it as a career, but people can do this without making it a career, right?
You can, yeah, and most people do. But I think if you really truly enjoy it, you'll want to spend more time on it. You won't want to make it your second priority. And so for me, it was about finding other incomes that would supplement being able to commit to council as my first priority. So, I've been a small business owner and done odd jobs all over the place. So every once in a while I'd pick up something extra, but council was fundamentally my first priority, and I think that made it so much more enjoyable for me.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for coming on here, Jillian. I know that a lot of people have looked and been excited about the work that you're doing, especially around transit and everything. So I really appreciate you talking with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Our thanks to Jillian Merrick. Let me know who you want to see come on the show by tweeting me at Grant Bachand. Search us up on Facebook by going to PG Up Close. Till next time, thanks for watching.